Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, I have now.
Great. Okay, let's make a start. I'll start with karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, kia hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. I'm sure the transcription doesn't say that at all. Welcome everybody to this quite short notice meeting looking at the government's proposals for redesign. So I just thought I would start the hui with a bit of an overview of the consultation documents and what's available. And then we can think about whether we want to make a submission collectively as ATLAANZ. If so, what would that position be? Because obviously it would need to represent a consensus or a majority of members' positions, and given that different institutions may be differently affected by the proposal, that may or may not be possible. Otherwise, looking at perhaps how we can get together for some discussions to tease out ideas that we may want to submit on individually or as teams with our work colleagues or other groups. So yeah, so the TEC and the Ministry of Education are now consulting on what is to replace Te Pūkenga. Why that is important is that unlike the last consultation, that means anybody can submit. So previously, Te Pūkenga only wanted to hear from Te Pūkenga employees. This time, any member of the public can submit. So ATLAANZ can submit as ATLAANZ, and ATLAANZ members who are not Te Pūkenga staff can also submit individually as well if they choose to. So the consultation is just starting and meetings are being held across the country. There's face-to-face options and there's online options. Face-to-face options are obviously at the Polytechs for the most part, but other places as well, and online options, and you can register for those online. Consultation closes on the 12th of September, so we don't have very much time if we are going to pull something together. So really we're here today to kind of get a sense of whether we want to think about making a joint submission as ATLAANZ. Okay, so there are a number of documents to do with this consultation, and it's quite important to realise that they are not all the same thing. So the main sources of information for the consultation are available on the TEC website, and particularly there is a consultation document which is called Redesign of the Vocational Education and Training System, Proposals for Public Consultation. There's a number of other documents floating around, and some of those documents are being discussed in the media as well. And so that's giving a bit of mixed messaging, which I think is a little bit dangerous, because if you don't actually read the consultation document, you might think some of those wider discussions are what is being proposed, and they may or may not be. So some of the other documents that are useful to look at are the regulatory impact statement, which kind of compares and contrasts various options, the funding determination, which talks about proposed changes to funding, and the specialist advisor group recommendations, which is what was being discussed on RNZ yesterday. It's a document of specialist advisors. They made a report to the minister, and that report theoretically informed her decision, although she ignored most of it, that was released under the Official Information Act to RNZ yesterday. And so some of those stories and discussions that they were talking about was from information that the advisors made recommendations, not necessarily what the government's going for. So to make a submission, there's various ways you can do it. There's a submission template that you can fill out individually or perhaps collectively with your team. There's an online submission form if you prefer it to do it that way. And there's also an email address if you just want to kind of write your own thing and submit that. And I suspect that possibly ATLAANZ would want to maybe just write its own email, or because not all of these changes affect us as a profession. They might affect us as employees of Te Pūkenga, but not necessarily as learning advisors as such. So this is the current structure which the government is proposing to replace. So there's these 6 workforce development councils that are involved in program development, curriculum development, liaising with industry to make sure the courses are meeting the needs of employers, seeking advice from Māori. It's a sort of consultation and then setting the requirements for qualifications. Then there's Te Pūkenga, which is obviously the Institutes of Technology and Polytechs, as well as the ITOs, all merged into Te Pūkenga, and then the PTEs, wānanga and universities are sitting outside of Te Pūkenga, but still affected by particularly Proposal 3 of this, of what the government's putting forward. So that's what's being replaced. The government, in preparing its proposal, was given a lot of advice. So that advice is outlined in those 2 documents, the Regulatory Impact Statement and the Special Advisor Group recommendations that were released under the Official Information Act to RNZ. So basically, the government was presented with 4 possible options. So the first option was essentially stand up the former polytechs back to what they were, except that there would be a couple more mergers, so we'd end up with 12 polytechs rather than the 16 that there were originally. The next option was 8 polytechs plus the open polys sitting outside of that. So those 8 polytechs would involve some mergers, Unitec with MIT, WIT, UCOL and Whitireia Welltech all together, and then 2 groups in the South Island, ARA with NMIT and Te Tai Potini and SIT and Otago. That was the preferred option in the Regulatory Impact Statement. So the government was advised to go with the 8+1. It has chosen not to. So the next option was a 4+1, so effectively looking at the current orohi that are under Te Pūkenga, except in what was proposed, NMIT would go into a South Island collective rather than being in Rohi 3. And the 4th option, which is the one that the government is consulting on, is to stand up some of the polytechs that are considered viable. Sorry, I don't know why I have a question mark there. And the smaller and less viable polytechs would be grouped together into a federation, which would be anchored to the open polytech. So I guess what I want to say here is it's really important to separate that discussion that might be happening about the advice that the government received versus the proposal that the government has put forward. And in the advice that the government received, they did list which polytechs would potentially stand alone. The government has not put that in the proposal. So don't assume that those proposed polytechs will necessarily stand alone if the consultation is accepted and goes ahead. They may be those ones, they may not. So if your polytech is on that list, you're not necessarily safe because the consultation document does not mention which polytechs would stand alone and or how many. So the regulatory impact statement, which is kind of like, you know, what would the policy and budget consequences and things be of these proposed options, compared them to the status quo, and kind of evaluated, would this be better than status quo or worse than status quo? So for each of the proposals, they have come up with some kind of policy settings and evaluated those proposals against the policy settings. So there's a number of tables, they look like this. So it's red if it's worse and it's green if it's better. But the criteria that they were evaluating the proposals against were set by, I don't know who, policy people in Wellington, I suppose, but didn't have direct consultation with staff or students. So they are policy priorities. They're not necessarily the priorities of the people on the ground in these institutions. So this is the consultation document itself, and this is really what we're being asked to give advice on, not those other things. So there are no politics kind of named in terms of who's going where in this document, and I think that's really important to remember. So this is the main document, and the page numbers I'm going to give from here on in relate to this document, unless I say otherwise, basically. So there's three aspects of the consultation. There's three proposals. So one is to redesign polytechs. Basically, some unspecified will stand alone if they are financially viable, and other not financially viable ones will be federated and anchored to the Open Polytech. Proposal 2 is about replacing the current 6 workforce development councils, and in my view, it's the only genuine consultation in this document because they give us 2 options that they want feedback on. And number 3 is related to changes to the way the sector is funded. So moving away from bulk funding back to something more similar to the SAC funding that we used to have prior to Te Pūkenga, prior to 2023 or whenever it came in. So this is basically the illustrations of what that might look like. So you've got some independent polytechs doing their own thing as they did prior to Te Pūkenga, and then other smaller ones anchored to Open Poly, which will provide some back office functions, but also some kind of academic education functions for program development, possibly online resources. That's a little less clear. So there will be some movement potentially between the independent ones and the not independent ones. So if at some point a polytech or perhaps a merger of polytechs becomes financially viable, it could move out of the federation and become independent. And if an independent one starts to have financial or academic stability issues, it might have to go into the federation until it sorts itself out. So yeah, there could be flow in between. So basically what the government is saying is that the ITPs, the Institutes of Technology and Polytechs that can show a robust pathway to financial and educational sustainability will be re-established as standalone entities. There may be some mergers. The only one mentioned was Unitec MIT, so it looks pretty likely that that's going ahead. They will have more autonomy from next year, with a view to most of them standing alone from 2026, and there'll be some advisory groups working alongside them to transition into that, but we don't know necessarily who or how many. We know what the advice the government received was. We do not know if the government is intending to take that advice. Then there is the unholy federation of everybody else, who is not considered likely to be financially sustainable in the near future. So in the Specialist Advisory Group document, which is the one released to RNZ under the Official Information Act, page 8 of that makes it very clear that the recommendation was that this federation had a central services unit which provided sort of back office functions and perhaps unified programs or those kinds of things. The government has made it very clear in the consultation document that there will be no head office. So that is another of the recommendations that was made that the government has not put into the consultation document. There will be no head office or head office functions. So the Open Polytech will function as an anchor institution, not necessarily a head office, and it will provide what the functions, I guess, that the smaller institutions are not able to provide for themselves. So it's a little unclear. That's likely to be some academic, financial, program development, those kinds of things. But there was some suggestion that perhaps some would have more administrative functions locally than others, and others might have more administrative functions merged in with the Polytech somehow. So it's very clear that the intention is that these smaller, less viable regional polytechs will offer fewer programs with low numbers, unlikely to be run. and there's likely to be some sort of a collaboration with Open Polytech, possibly access to those resources for blended delivery with some local support, or possibly some kind of enrolment sharing arrangement. That's a little bit unclear in this document. Obviously, there'd be another phase of consultation around that if this one gets off the line. But it does say in there that there's an intention to keep some local delivery, particularly around foundation education, so study and career prep, foundation skills type courses that lead into other programs, trades, healthcare, and specialist delivery relevant to the region. So, for example, Taranaki has the oil and gas industry. Maybe there'd be special provision for running a program associated with that, or whatever is local in your area. So that's proposal 1. Proposal 2 is to replace the workforce development councils. There are 2 options here. So we currently have 6 workforce development councils. The government considers that these are far too expensive. The advice was that some of them appear to be meeting industry's needs better than others. They haven't quite bedded in yet, so some, but the government's basically gone, no, too expensive, don't want it. So they've put forward 2 options. One is to have industry training boards, which would be similar to the ITOs that previously existed. And the other would be to have some sort of standard setting bodies. For both of those, they've said probably 8, but not definitely 8. So that's proposal 2, which unless you are working in one of those workplace-based learning organisations, possibly doesn't affect learning advisors as much. And proposal 3 is about funding reforms. So prior to Pūkenga, which has a unified funding system, so kind of a bulk grant from the government, institutions received SAC funding, so student achievement component funding, which was basically based on enrolments, so how many students you got in particular programs. So the unified funding system currently has 3 components. It has a delivery component, which is based on student numbers. Certain subjects are funded at a higher rate, so like science and technology funded higher than, I don't know, social science or hospitality or whatever. And rates vary for mode of delivery. So at the moment, extramural or distance study is funded lower than face-to-face delivery. There's a learner component, which is effectively equity funding. So it's providing a top-up for institutions that have high numbers of learners with low prior attainment, disabled learners, and Māori and Pacific learners. And then it has a strategic component, which enables money, the government to kind of put extra money into skills development in areas that are of strategic importance. So where there's skills shortages in New Zealand, they might provide additional funding to offer extra places in those areas. So the main shifts that are proposed in this document is to disestablish that strategic component and to even out the funding so that extramural funding is not funded at a lower rate. So obviously there's a significant move to online and blended learning, and they want to incentivize that by giving it the same kind of money. So so that would apply not just to ITPs, it would apply to universities, wānangas, and private training establishments as well. So they are looking to restore the funding of ITPs to what it would have been if we were still under the SAC funding system. However, what they have said is that in order to achieve that, they would be repurposing the funding that goes to support learners with low prior achievement, disabled learners, and Māori and Pacific learners. So that is probably a key area that as learning advisors, we would want to be making submissions on, is the need to retain that funding for learners who potentially have higher needs and require higher levels of support. Obviously, if that funding was gone, that could have implications for how our services are run. So then they said they would be reprioritising the work-based rates. So currently work-based learning is funded at a higher rate to provide funding for the standard setting body that was proposed in Proposal 2. So again, robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And then adding some incentives for regional industry, international education, and then there was this statement about kind of programs or working with communities to, I guess, offer options that would reduce job seeker support numbers. So obviously the government is quite intent on reducing the number of people on job seeker support benefits, and so that would be programs that potentially people who are on job seeker support benefits could move into study and then move into work. Those kinds of programs might be given some targeted funding to do that. So for each of those proposals, the government has, or I guess it's the Ministry of Education and TEC really, but the proposal contains very specific questions, which I guess are narrow because they only want to hear what they want to hear, which is why I would suggest that perhaps sending emails that comment on things that we think are important might be better than using the existing forms. So it's like, do you agree? Why or why not? What do you think the benefits and risks are? Those kinds of things. So for each of the proposals, there's a set of questions. These are the questions for Proposal 2, for Proposal 3, and overall. In the consultation document, the list of questions, all of the questions are on page 31. So if you want a kind of one pager to give to all your team about, here's some questions to think about giving advice on, then page 31 of the document is where you'll get those. So I guess that what I want to do now is kind of open up the discussion to think about whether this is something that we collectively as ATLAANZ want to make a submission on. If so, how? Or if we just continue to kind of hold discussions, perhaps raise the things that we're submitting on to give other people ideas and support for making their own submissions would be another way to go. So I guess I'll just open it up now if anyone wants to comment.
Will you make this PowerPoint available to us?
Yes, Bridget's going to put it onto the website.
Thank you.
I might ask Claire. Claire was involved in putting together the submission that we made on the last restructure. Do you think that we'll be able to come to a kind of collective position on this in the way that we did last time?
Yes and no. Georgie also worked on this along with Liz down at R2. I think there are some aspects of it that we probably can reach consensus, or I think that particularly around maybe the funding section, and in terms of funding those priority learners. As Dawn said, we all come from institutions that are affected by this in potentially different ways. From my perspective, I'm in the institution in the naughty corner, so effectively we would be pegged in the federation model, and I don't believe that would change. And so, I mean, we have some very specific views from a learning advisor perspective in terms of what that blended learning and online learning looks like, and the needs of our learners in our region, and what their support needs are, and have worked with many students over years that have learnt in that way, and the implications of that and their support needs of that. So I think there could be some aspects that we could collaborate on. From experience from the last one, we had a series of meetings and discussions where those members who were interested, contributed ideas and things, and then we set up a writing group, and then we sort of split the writing group up into several key components too. I think we ended up with 3 or 4, Georgie. I can't remember what we submitted in the end. Submissions on different things. It's difficult because the membership is so wide and covers learning advisors across all the sector. Whether you can speak with one voice or not. I suspect we can on the funding aspect, but yeah.
Maybe just adding on there as well, I was, yes, somewhat involved in the previous process, but really agree with you. I think there's some aspects around that proposal for the redistribution of the targeted funding for priority cohorts that we could definitely advocate for with one voice, because I know a lot of our institutions that will really affect the way that we may be able to support learners. I know we're advocating here at ATLAANZ with our Chief Executive at the moment to make sure that there's still priority learner groups under us as an institution. We believe at ATLAANZ we would likely be one of those on the robust pathway towards that financial and educational sustainability, but that is not confirmed anywhere. So there is a pathway to get there still. So quite a bit of work to do there. But I speak on behalf of what is a fairly large learning advisor team here at ATLAANZ. We'd really like to also advocate for other ITPs such as yours, Claire, who might be under the federated model and have some really strong concerns or advocacy needs that you'd like to put forward. So potentially there is definitely scope for pulling something together from ATLAANZ at large, but I do recognise we're on a really short time frame. So the writing group might actually just be split up between a few people rather than as many members as we had for the last tranche of feedback. And thank you, Dawn. I'm really grateful for this. This gives an amazing overview, and I would also love to share the slides with our wider team. So thank you for your mahi.
Absolutely. You've done an amazing job of summing that all up, Dawn, in however many slides. It's extraordinary. It's the most comprehensive version I've seen ever.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a bit of a mission. It's quite challenging because if you're getting your information from the media, they're often talking about the advice that the government received and not actually what is proposed. And what is proposed is quite vague, it is. It's quite high level. Yeah.
The other thing to be aware of, I used to be a policy geek in a previous life. So the regulatory impact statement that the ministry have provided, so every, and I might be telling you all stuff you already know, so apologies if I do, but basically the ministry each ministry prepares a regulatory impact statement that is basically supposed to be independent advice around proposals that the government is proposing to change. So these regulatory impact statements are produced all the time. But the most fascinating thing about this is that the ministry has, as Dawn said, has not supported the minister's proposals at all, yet the minister continued to proceed to go out to consultation. So the regulatory impact statement, along with the responses to the consultation, will go to Cabinet. So the regulatory impact statements are always considered by Cabinet before any final decisions are made. Now, the weight in which they put on it, who would know? But yeah, so that's just the wider process that goes on behind the government machinations of government.
Maybe just a little more context there too. You might have had similar, but we had a hui for consultation with TEC and Ministry of Ed reps, I think last week, and it was either Kim Olberg from TEC or Katrina Sutrick from the Ministry of Ed who suggested that this is the direction that we're going, so it's much better to put our energy into feedback around the proposed models than going back to the other models that were considered and put forward as well. So I thought that was really relevant because quite a few of our kaimahi, our staff, were asking around some of the other proposed models. So I think, Dawn, you've been really clear on that too, that it's best our energies are kept to what's on the proposed table as such, but where we can advocate within those proposed models.
Yeah, I think realistically, there's only likely to be minor changes within the proposed model. Yeah. And I missed the last bit that you said, Georgie, sorry. Maybe I can just stop there.
That's perfect. Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah. Is there anyone else that wants to kind of add some I don't know, thoughts? Okay, so my next question is, if there were to be a collective ATLAANZ proposal, who would be available to contribute to that?
I'd need to chat to my team, Dawn, but I believe that, yeah, one of our other team would be available.
Okay, so potentially someone from ARA, potentially someone from which Shelley's put her hand up.
Yeah,
Are there
potentially I
others?
can too. I haven't got huge amounts of time, but I can do some.
Okay, so there are a few people willing to kind of lead that writing and thinking. So I have scheduled 2 more of these meetings, but obviously a writing group could meet outside of those times as well to put forward suggestions. It sounds like we're fairly united on something needs to be said about the need to maintain equity funding in some form. And concerns, I think, around a focus on online and blended learning that might not be suitable for all learners, or that some learners might need a lot of support to be able to do that. I do think it's important to keep in mind that the proposal did say that those kind of foundation trades, those kind of things are still likely to be done locally. They may be done differently, but still with a face-to-face component. There really is nothing in this document that talks about support services or where support services might be located, or whether support services would be outsourced to Open Poly or outsourced to a private provider such as Studiosity or other similar services. There's no discussion about that at all. So that's potentially something we could comment on as well, is the need for support services to be in the regions.
Sorry, I was just going to add in when in our last proposals, our last submissions to the previous proposal, again, it didn't go to that level of detail. It was still very, very high level, and we had discussions of, do we just leave it and go in at the next level to offer that kind of commentary, but we decided as a group that no, we wanted to start raising those as they started thinking about that next level of stuff, rather than waiting to see what they came up with. So that's the view we took last time.
I'm wondering too that if by coordinating this type of response from ATLAANZ, that will probably really help individual submissions from learning advisors or teams of learning advisors. And we're trying to think around how we can leverage off some of our external stakeholders or some of our advisory groups too. And I'm wondering if maybe Tanya and team, what do you think around if we approach MATLAANZ and PATLAANZ to also put forward some short statements or emails of feedback, particularly again in response to that potential loss of equity distribution?
I'm okay with seeing whether or not that would be a viable huarahi for you for people to put those emails through. The dilemma is is whether or not that comes with understanding of what they're committing to and what they're saying. For example, this was quite comprehensive, and I agree with everybody else that was here, Dawn, that you've done such an amazing job just to bring that to our attention. And I think what the benefit is that if we do say to MATLAANZ, PATLAANZ, would love to go along have your attention to this and to participate in some meaningful way, that they need to know the background to this. I guess that's part of the reason for the videoing. Just a couple of things to say, just going into a different topic. So in my capacity as the president, I would love to know in the submission how we voice that. I would like it to be clear that ATLAANZ supports its members and prioritises that in terms of understanding that their position is both unique and important to the different institutions, but also that this concern is backed by ATLAANZ executive or whatever that means. Just to clarify that, I would like that to be part of the email being sent out, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, I'm still fluey, getting over the flu. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, it does.
So I'm here to tautoko, and honestly, this specificity in terms of what we need to focus on is really critical. I'm really pleased that we're targeting the main areas that we can inform and bring our expertise to in terms of our concerns and what we think is important. Hopefully that will be impactful and advise clearly the government as it goes forward.
Is there anyone else that would like to share some thoughts?
Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora, Lee.
So just something that we've noticed here at our Rotorua campus at Toihohomai is the lack of anything regarding mātauranga Māori, te ao Māori in the proposal, even coming down to consultation with hapu. There are noted in there iwi, but it's very lacking anything for mātauranga Māori when you're looking at this proposal. So yeah, and Dawn, thank you for this mahi. You know, meeting with our regional chief executive. You know, she seemed to know nothing like what you've got here. So yeah, awesome mahi. Yeah, so I think that is a concern for us here, is that lack of mātauranga in that proposal. Yeah,
Mhm.
so kia ora.
It certainly does seem to be aligned with the broader theme of Māori not getting special treatment. And that, yeah, so iwi consultation and targeted equity funding certainly seems to be being undermined by this proposal. That said, though, I guess that sort of vague run courses targeting job seeker support and regional priorities presumably would involve some local consultation and priority setting. But yeah, how significant the Māori voice or Māori worldview would be in those conversations is really very vague in this document. Yeah. I think, again, that's probably an area where we can all agree that we, you know, as aligned with ATLAANZ's values, we would expect to see greater Māori voice and iwi consultation. Yeah. And I think that's one of the concerns too with that federated model is, you know, if we're all anchored to Open Poly and offering Open Poly courses, where is the local perspectives and iwi voice in that?
I would say also that being anchored to online courses is of concern, hugely concerning, given the learning styles of the majority of the students that we deal with, which is, for us at least, there's always a preference for face-to-face learning as opposed to just online.
Mm.
Yeah, just to tautoko that too, Tanya, we've noticed an influx of tauira from our neurodiverse, our accessibility team, and yeah, an online is just not going to work for them. And we're getting probably 100%, 200% more of those students this semester than what we have had in the past. And yeah, quite, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, and just even that kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face, it just works wonders for them. They can trust you, can build that rapport. If you're studying online, there's nothing there, and they may not even show up, So yeah, that online is definitely, it's a barrier, it's a concern. Yeah, because most Kiwis face to face, we're face to face people. We tried our best during COVID, and we are now dealing with some of those effects of some of those kids that were at high school that are now, it's tough. So yeah, tautoko that.
And I think historically the evidence is quite clear that online courses typically have lower completion rates, even though they do work very well for some people. But typically people that have more success in education, more prior success in education. So.
And just adding to that too, kia ora whānau, I think that the online thing also comes under equity. If I'm thinking about here in Taranaki, we've got ākonga who don't have access to internet at home or in fact resources to study online at all.
I was just going to say, online does work for some people. It's not completely does it, and we offer a range of blended options, which I'm sure you all do too. But it's interesting the level of support that we see is needed for those students, and not just neurodiverse students, and not just Māori students and Pacifica students, but obviously the needs of those are often greater, but the blended and the online students, they tend to seek out more support, and it's that kanohi to kanohi support rather than online support. And we all know, and after COVID, as soon as we started opening up doors, the students wanted to come in, they wanted to meet face to face rather than online. So yeah, I think that's something that we can all add in from our collective experience as well.
And I think too that there has not been consultation with students about what they want or what they prefer. Shelley.
I'm just also interested in the justification. I know that we have to put our energies to this proposal and model, but I'm sort of trying to understand why it's Open Poly that's anchoring, like what's the justification, and is it to do with the blended learning aspect? And then I can't understand if it's about us becoming entrenched in those systems, how we would then extrapolate ourselves in terms of becoming standalone. So I'm just still not quite understanding, the Open Poly aspect of it all.
And I don't think there's a lot of detail there. So it's hard to understand when there isn't the detail there. Yeah. How could and potentially, yeah, if we were all mixed up with open poly, you know, could work continue on mergers that might make groups or clusters of polytechs financially viable as a collective? Like, for example, for Te Reo Welltech, UCOL, WIT, what if we wanted to become an entity and stand alone and get out of the federation? How would we do that when we're embedded in that web? Yeah.
Could you? That's the other thing. Could you, if you become embedded in that web?
I don't see how.
No.
But likewise, you know, WinTech, for example, may stand alone, but it may not. So once it's embedded, what happens? But also, you know, as we know, student numbers wax and wane according to the economy and employment opportunities. If numbers were to drop and it became not in the black and was put into the federation, you know, then what? How does it get out again? So it's obviously there as a threat, like you better be financially viable or you're going in the federation with all the losers. So yeah, it's it's a concern.
Let's knock that on the head first. Let's not put federation with the idea that it's a loser group. Let's not go there.
It's pretty clear you're not financially sustainable. You're in the naughty corner. So interestingly, I did a light search how often financial comes up in this document, and it's like 40 times. So it's clearly the priority is money, so not people. Yeah, I'm very concerned that students haven't had input into this proposal, and students won't even know to be submitting on this proposal. That's really a concern for me. Yeah, it affects them primarily.
I guess sorry, Tana, you go.
I was just going to say maybe we can field that concern through to our union, through to TEU, and get them to advocate for that concern.
At ARA, and I don't know if this is possible at some of your institutions as well, but we're really thinking, how can we leverage some different spaces? So we have a Pacific advisory group, we have a Pacific student group, and because we're doing lots of mahi in this space, and I'm really grateful for the learning advisors summarising some of the key concerns, we can help share context and help those voices activate as well. So again, it's a big time resource, but we're trying to do what we can before that September the 12th close off date.
That's interesting. I've just read Bridget's comment. So they've organised hui with Ākonga in Taranaki. Was that the same with other regions? They haven't come to Manawatu yet, so
Right.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen an Ākonga consultation session.
No, there's none. No, there's none here. Certainly none here.
Not that I'm aware of in Waitaha, Canterbury.
Yeah.
No, and that regulatory impact statement did kind of make that caveat as a limitation that you know, staff and students weren't involved in setting the policy priorities that it was then evaluating things against. That said, though, consultation with iwi and Māori was among the criteria for a lot of the proposals they evaluated, and didn't come up that well. So yeah. Okay, I'm just mindful of time, knowing that we all have other commitments that we need to get to. Is there anyone that wants to make a final comment before we close off this meeting?
I'm just keen to check my understanding here, Dawn. So for the group at large, we've agreed that next steps there will be at least a few writers from different institutions coming up with at least a resource that institutions can draw on, if not going further than that, and hopefully an email of feedback from ATLAANZ at large if we can somehow get consensus from ATLAANZ membership. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I've scheduled 3 of these meetings for the next 2 or 3 weeks, because then the proposal would need to go to exec and then go and be put in. So I guess what we'll do is we'll try and make the slides that I've used today and the recording available to members, encourage people to come to the next meeting, and potentially a smaller group. So Claire, Georgie, Shelley, was there anyone else that wanted to be involved in that writing group? We can invite others to join that as well via email.
Just a quick query, is the main web page the best place to put this PowerPoint rather than targeted to our Te Pūkenga members?
I don't think this just affects Te Pūkenga, and anyone can submit.
Fair comment.
I mean, you know, the equity funding stuff affects everyone.
Mm.
They don't have to take part, obviously. I'm just mindful that I really don't want to be emailing every member again, because the number of it just clogs my inbox. I just can't deal with it. It's overwhelming. Yeah.
So would
All
it
right.
be helpful, Dawn, before the next meeting, if we just come up with a bunch of themes
I think so. Yeah.
for discussion? Yeah, which we can draw from the notes that you prepared from here and then go further. Is that?
I think that sounds useful. Yeah. Okay. And, you know, mindful too that a lot of these meetings are still happening. Ours is today at WIT, so we may know a little bit more before the next meeting as well.
Malo Pito, thanks so much, Dawn. Really appreciate you coordinating us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, I'll just close with karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia I te ara uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wārua I te ara takatū, koi rā I rongo, whakaria ake ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, hau, pai marere. Thanks everybody.
Pai marere. Well done. Thank you, everybody.